liberal America and a conservative America. There is the United States of America. There is not a black America and a white America and Latino America and Asian America. There's the United States of America. Change happens because the American people demand it, because they rise up and insist on new ideas and new leadership, a new politics for a new time. America, this is one of those moments. Now, I won't pretend the path I'm offering is quick or easy. I never have. You didn't elect me to tell you what you wanted to hear. You elected me to tell you the truth. What we heard was a deeply pessimistic vision of a country where we turn against each other and turn away from the rest of the world. And that is not the America I know. The America I know is full of courage and optimism and ingenuity. The America I know is decent and generous. This president and those in power, those who benefit from keeping things the way they are counting on your cynicism. They know they can't win you over with their policies. Do not let them take away your power. Do not let them take away your democracy.
Anticipation is already building for what is expected to be yet another moment from that president, former president, Barack Obama. And Michelle Obama is also speaking tonight. They both take center stage tonight in front of their hometown crowd of Chicago, Illinois. It will also be a full circle moment for the vice president, getting a huge show of support from the man she spent time knocking on doors for back in Iowa in 2008. A few years ago, she shared this photo of her from just before the Iowa caucuses that year. Now, the former president will return the favor, asking Americans to help elect Vice President Harris and help her make her own history. Joining our conversation, former Obama senior advisor, co-host of Pod Save America, Dan Pfeiffer joins us. Claire and the Rev are still here. Dan, I went back and watched that 2020 convention speech, which I think shook me when I heard it, because he did not flinch or shy away from sort of the horrors of that political moment, of what the Trump years had wrought. This is a different moment, but the same risk. And I wonder I don't even know how you guys field questions about what should we expect, because all those speeches are so, you sort of stack them on top of each other, and they encapsulate the moment in which we were all sort of operating. But tell me what you think went into the president's crafting of his speech tonight.
Well, I think he has a couple of tasks. One, he does have to remind people, as he did in 2020, of the dangers of Donald Trump, what that means for real people. And the way he's handled Trump in the past is he, instead of sort of fear-mongering about him, he cuts Trump down to size with humor. Right, because we don't want him to pretend to be a strong man. He's a clown. He's a failure. He's a loser. And to do that in a very good-natured, humorous Obama way. But his real main task tonight is that Kamala Harris has been his friend for 20 years. They met when he was running for Senate in 2004 at a fundraiser. As Senator McCaskill knows, as someone who was on the Obama campaign very early, there weren't a lot of elected officials who endorsed him in the beginning. She was there. She was someone who did anything the campaign asked. She knocked doors in sub-zero temperatures in Iowa. And so he can testify to as someone who's worked with her, as someone who knows her, and help do what I think is the central task of this convention, which is to introduce Kamala Harris, her story, her vision, and her values to the American people.
What do you think, and what do you say privately, when you hear people compare this political moment to any of the moments of the Obama era?
I mean, obviously a lot has happened since 2008, right? Watching those convention speeches is sort of a way of seeing how America's changed from his message in 2004 to what you showed from 2020. I'm here back in Chicago, watching this. I also feel like I'm watching my life through those speeches. But I think so it's not the same, but there are elements that feel similar, right? Like Barack Obama, Kamala Harris is trying to build a movement that's not about her, it's about the people. like President Obama, she understands that no matter what the polls say, she's an underdog, and she is running with the sort of fearlessness that Obama brought to his campaigns, right? Willing to take risks, willing to take things on, being courageous, not cautious in your decision making. And I think the most important thing is that when you're building a political movement, and this is something Obama did, and it's something you see every day from Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, is you want your movement to be fun and joyous, to be a party that people want to come to want to show up at your rallies. And I see that every day in her campaign. And so it's a different moment, but if you were there for the Obama years, particularly in 2008, you see things that are very, very similar and make me feel very good about the kind of campaign she's running.
So obviously I was on the McCain 08 campaign, but I lived in New York, and I would come home for a weekend, and all my friends' kids had on Hope and Change onesies. And I was like, oh, we're so screwed. I mean, everyone's kid is where, this has that feeling where there is a gravitational pull to Kamala Harris and Tim Walz's message. The other side of that is sort of the more boring and mundane work, and we're going to talk to Dan Kinanen again, but the ground game. What is your assessment of the state of the race in the battleground states?
I think it's incredibly close, right? In a very short period of time, Kamala Harris has reopened the map. Right now, she is now competitive in all 6, and I would actually say 7 battleground states, because I think she has made North Carolina competitive. So she has multiple paths to get there, but she has work to do. Right? If the election were held today, I don't know who would win, but she has the momentum. And so what's so important about Dan Kinanen and the people on the Harris campaign is you can build all the field operations in the world, but you can't manufacture enthusiasm. Now she has enthusiasm, and that operation that they have put together can capture that enthusiasm as Obama's did and turn it into a strong GOTV organizing campaign. But so things are looking great, but there's a lot of work to do, because this is going to be a very, very close race.
It's such a good point. You can't build a ground game with unpaid volunteers and momentum without the enthusiasm. But the enthusiasm without that brilliant ground game doesn't get you the margins that you need in the states that you need. You said you sort of see your own life playing out through those speeches and these moments. It feels like everyone in the room has this shared experience, and some of the emotion that I felt in the nearly 4-minute standing ovation for President Obama was everything that we've been through as a country. If you're on the pro-democracy side, you've felt all that too. I wonder what you make of their ability to sort of project that energy in the room out into living rooms, and how they sustain that through the week.
Well, I think that they're doing a great job so far. It is really about, there's a strategic task here, as I said, to introduce her to the country, to raise the stakes in the election, remind people about Trump and Project 2025 and all of that. But there is so much enthusiasm, so much joy, so much excitement, and you feel it sort of building. I noticed it the second I landed in Chicago on Sunday night, and they're doing a great job of doing it. And it is, there's a progression here. There was the great speeches from Secretary Clinton and President Biden last night. President Biden had his moment. He officially passed the torch to Kamala Harris. You have the Obamas tonight. You have Tim Walz tomorrow night. We've had an array of some of the rising stars in our party speaking throughout the night. And I will say, just sitting here, I feel better about the state of the Democratic Party than I have at any point in recent memory, because it really does feel like we have this huge bench. We're unified. We're moving forward. It doesn't mean the election is easy. It doesn't mean that we're necessarily automatically going to win or as a landslide. But the party itself feels ready for the moment in a way. And I think there's something Kamala Harris gets credit for, is since the moment Trump came down that escalator, all of our politics has been about Trump. Stopping him, talking about fears of him. She is doing something different. Her politics are not about Trump. They're about her. They're about hope, future. It's about doing something as opposed to stopping Trump from doing something bad. And so continuing to build on that this week, I think is great. I feel like there's a real chance they're going to come out of here with a ton of momentum, with some great campaigning going forward. And so, we're one day in here, but very successful convention so far, I think.
So they have just finished the roll call, the ceremonial roll call, sort of, the celebratory roll call, as they called it, in Chicago. This is the sort of celebrity host for the night, Ana Navarro. Lawrence, watching that roll call, it was a lot of fun.
So tell me, are you excited?
I don't think any state had more fun than Georgia did with Lil Jon.
Wow.
But I don't know. I feel like that's a subjective take.
Well, we got to see Ben Wickler, who's a frequent guest on all of our shows, the most serious guy in Wisconsin, the guy who runs the Democratic Party in Wisconsin. And he had the cheese head.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's heartening.
You know, we know you're from Wisconsin. You don't have to put the cheese head on, but everyone except the governor. But boy, this was, as flawlessly organized as you could imagine. But you know, just to step back a little bit, if you go back a couple of months ago to the people, even before the debate, who were urging Joe Biden to step out of the race and have an open convention, you wouldn't have a nominee. You would not have a nominee as of now.
Yeah.
If any of that advice was followed.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just not followed by Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, who really did everything they could to shut out any kind of competition here, but the reasonable Democrats whose names were being thrown around were never asked, oh, by the way, would you like to compete at a convention for this nomination? These people were just dreaming about this open contested convention here, which would have been, I think, extremely chaotic. And instead what you have is the best convention production I've seen so far. Tonight, they're roughly on time. They're only 10 minutes behind right now.
Okay.
Last night was ridiculous because every speaker, except for the civilians, every elected official spoke more than double the amount of time they were allotted. More than double.
Yeah.
That hasn't happened tonight. We'll see what happens.
Steph, remarkable split screen. I mean, we're seeing here on the left side, this is Kamala Harris not in Chicago, but rather in swing state, Wisconsin, 90 miles away in Milwaukee. Meanwhile, the Democrats have just done some mashup of quinceanera, bar mitzvah, wedding, 50th wedding anniversary with the DJ and everything.
And sold out 2 arenas.
Yeah.
Right? So when you think about what is getting under Donald Trump's skin, I was at the RNC last month, right? Flags everywhere. Patriotism. What we've seen in the last 2 days is Democrats taking those words back, right? You are seeing freedom on their signs. You're not seeing mass deportations and another sort of quiet flex, right? Every state, you saw another super famous song, an artist from that state. Think about all the artists and their estates that have gone after Donald Trump in the last 6 years, whether it's Sinead O'Connor, the Village People, recently Celine Dion, over and over, Tom Petty, stop playing our songs at your rallies. And tonight we saw every artist from every genre of music representing their states, including Lil Jon in person. That's a flex.
I was going to say, Atlanta proving itself once again to be the cultural capital of the United States.
You know, what you're selling in a general election is it's an invitation, right? Come with me. If you just glance at social media, I mean, everyone was spellbound. And that doesn't fall along political, junky, non-political. I mean, it was like a sporting event. It was unbelievable live television for everybody watching. And there's a lot of important stuff that happens at conventions. And Lawrence is making important points about the road not taken and how much better this is. But at the end of the day, by this point in a general, you're trying to invite people into your side. And what they projected to the entire viewing public, and frankly the world, is a massive, entertaining, inclusive, alienating no one invitation to everyone to come on board. It's a vital strategic step.
We're just going to go back to the stage right now in Chicago if we can. Again, left side of your screen, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz So on the left side of your screen, we're seeing Kamala Harris and Tim Walz at their event in Milwaukee. We're expecting, in a moment, we're going to hear the first major speech of the night from Chuck Schumer. Before we bring on Chuck Schumer, can we go to Alex in Chicago? Do we have Alex? Oh, and Joy, we have you both. Tell us, for me, quinceanera, bar mitzvah, wedding, 50th wedding anniversary all together, and I want that DJ book for all of them. In the room, what was it like?
I have never wanted the playlist from a delegate role.
Seriously.
Seriously. DJ Cassidy is the DJ. Listen, Rachel, I'm sure he would be available for your next quinceanera.
Sure.
But it was a heavy jam in here. Joy.
It was a vibe. To quote what we've been talking about, you are the vibes correspondent.
Yeah.
It was a vibe. I mean, first of all, the roll call is my favorite thing. I'm just going to be super nerdy about it. It is actually my favorite thing about conventions because you get to see each state's special character and their special
flair.
Costumes and their special things. This was added. There's Chuck Schumer coming out and dancing out. Look at him. He's having a good time. Chuck Schumer getting his groove on.
All right, let's go to Chuck Schumer. 20 years after a Democratic National Convention speech that launched his career in national politics, now speaking as the 44th President of the United States. A final speech tonight from former President Barack Obama. The three final speeches tonight from the second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, winning the Relatability Olympics and telling the love story of his relationship with Kamala Harris. They celebrate their 10th wedding anniversary this week. In fact, on Thursday night, the night that she will accept formally the nomination of the Democratic Party for President of the United States. His speech followed immediately by a speech from Michelle Obama that I have to say is one of the best convention speeches I've ever seen by anybody in any circumstance. Not just because she's good at giving a speech, but because it was subtle and deep and thought-provoking and surprising. She did make a parallel point that her husband made as well in his speech about how this is going to be a close election and how there are practical things that need to be done. But her speech, speaking from a place, both a practical and very heartfelt place about what it is to be a person in politics, what it is to be a person in politics when you feel like you've got the momentum, but also when it feels like the momentum's gone, and when there's despair around your prospects, and when you make mistakes, and what people need to do to shore you up in that moment. Very unusual, I think perfectly delivered, and just a stunning speech. Barack Obama starting his remarks by saying, I'm feeling fired up. I'm feeling ready to go, even if I am the only person stupid enough to speak right after Michelle Obama. He then gave a great speech that began with a long, detailed ode to his vice president, Joe Biden, calling that decision to choose Biden as his running mate one of the best decisions he ever made, and then going on in detail about the accomplishments of Biden's own presidency before moving on to talk about not just the necessity of electing Kamala Harris, but again, a subtle, deep, original, interesting take on the things that divide us as Americans, not just politically, but culturally. Talking about our atomized existences in the culture that we have right now, and how the enthusiasm around this campaign right now can be one of the ways that we can feel confident that we can come together in common purpose. Deep, interesting speeches from both Mr. and Mrs. Obama, and something fun and original and great and moving from Doug Emhoff. Lawrence.
Yeah, I feel like I know Doug Emhoff. He's actually kind of a neighbor of mine in Los Angeles. I see him at the coffee joint once in a while with his little Secret Service detail following him. But I learned more about him in a speech. And I can't say that about anyone else I actually know who gives speeches. I just learned more about him in that speech than anything I've picked up over the years of listening to him privately. And it's such a unique spot. First person in history to be in this spot. First man.
Yeah.
Second gentleman on his way to being first gentleman, no doubt. And what he has made of that role is a model. By the way, it's a model for spouses of people in power. He was a high-powered member of a law firm, global law firm, working on the entertainment side. Absolutely no conceivable intersection with government. He quit that job and every penny of that income to take a teaching job because he didn't want the slightest possible interpretation of conflict of interest, because he was with a law firm that might, in some other office of that law firm, cross into a government situation that could be deemed a conflict of interest. I only wish that other spouses in these situations, male and female spouses, would do this. We have a wife of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court who still works for major law firms in America, taking millions upon millions of dollars a year from major law firms in America, while her husband serves as Chief Justice. So Doug Emhoff is the great example of that. Michelle Obama's speech didn't need to carry any of the governing specifics that Barack Obama's speech had to carry. So hers got to be shorter. It got to go straight to the heart and the mind. It got to insist to every voter that you need every vote, that you can't quibble over some slight difference you might have with this candidate. If you find this candidate to be imperfect, but fundamentally on your side, she called it foolishness to even hesitate about supporting eagerly this candidate.
And acting now, talking about the time is short, what needs to be done now.
And then Barack Obama, who does have the most difficult job in politics, which is following Michelle Obama on a stage. There's nothing harder to do, but it's the way we met him. We met him 20 years ago in exactly this context on a convention stage in Boston, and he has been the star of every convention stage he's appeared on since. He has done the impossible every time because he's been great every time and then finds a way to be great again that's different from the last time you saw him be great doing this. He and Michelle Obama went directly at Donald Trump, which I know we're going to hear from an enraged Donald Trump about. But then there were these lines where it had nothing to do with Trump, it seems, except you can't get Trump out of your mind. When Barack Obama says, our fellow citizens deserve the same grace we hope they'll extend to us when we have disagreements. Every previous Republican nominee of my lifetime was capable of saying that sentence in a speech, reading it if someone wrote it for him, and doing it. Donald Trump's the only person that when you see those words, you understand he doesn't know what they mean. He couldn't say them. He doesn't know what they mean. Talking about the joy that his mother-in-law had just being at the kitchen table with family. Donald Trump doesn't know what that means. All those lines that were about the world that Barack Obama thinks we all should live in and that we all appreciate, every one of those lines is alien to everything about Donald Trump.
I want to have our colleagues in Chicago join us. Joy and Alex are there watching on site and in situ. Tell us what you guys thought. Those were three sort of final speeches that all crescendoed toward the final three, each of which I thought was pretty great. How did it feel in the room?
I got to say, I want to talk about Barack Obama first, just because I was really struck. We've talked a lot about, as Lawrence said, the fact that he first appeared on the national radar at a convention hall 20 years ago. And it really felt like this, what we heard from him tonight was kind of, if there's a diptych of the classic Obama speech, this is the second half of a speech from a man who talked most famously about there is no red America, there is no blue America, there is the United States of America. And then had to watch as some of the landmark achievements of his presidency were the attempted dismantling of that by Donald Trump. And it's clear that he's been thinking a lot about what kind of America we really are. And I am sure that the Trump years were very difficult for him, not just as a president, but as a person who fundamentally believes in the goodness and the hope and the optimism that is part of the American project. And it really felt to me, watching him and listening to him tonight, that he looks at the Harris candidacy and the potential Harris presidency as an affirmation of everything he believes America is about. And there's this line at the end of his remarks where he says, I believe that's what we yearn for, a return to an America where we work together and look out for each other, a restoration of what Lincoln called, on the eve of civil war, our bonds of affection. We have thought of this country as hopelessly divided, and I think Obama recognizes it as divided, which is why he invokes the Civil War, but that he still believes that our better angels exist, and that Kamala Harris and her candidacy and her ascension is a manifestation of that. I thought it was a deeply, deeply thoughtful speech at a really critical time, not just for Democrats, but for Americans who have questioned who we are and where we're coming from, and most urgently, where we're going.
Yeah, it's very well put, Alex. And I just think, just to take a sort of meta view of what you're saying, part of what the message here was depth and originality and thoughtfulness is okay. That everything doesn't have to be a slogan and a soundbite, and there's places for those, but there's also place for deeply reasoned, nuanced, surprising, subtle argument, and that itself is a statement for the kind of cultural impact that you're talking about. Joy, what did you think?
Well, I will say tonight was an incredibly cathartic night, I think, for every Democrat in the country, but not necessarily just for Democrats. I did a quick Google as I was listening to one of our great orators, Barack Obama, give his speech. And according to the great Larry Sabato, when they crunched these numbers, some 8.5 million people who voted for Barack Obama turned around and voted for Donald Trump. And so Barack Obama has an ability to cross probably the greatest divide in American politics between Democrats and Republicans, because some of those Trump Republicans were Barack Obama voters, maybe even twice. There are Obama, Trump voters who exist. And so he's still as divisive as his presidency was, in the sense that people decided to go to war against it, to go to war against him, to trash and go to war against the First Lady, Michelle Obama. He still uniquely sits in a place. It's hard to believe it was 16 years ago, but my kids grew up with him as their president. That's the president they know. That's the world they know. And so the level of expectation that young Americans have about what they can have in a president was set by him. And so I think his speech is important. A couple quick lines. He said, "No nation, no society has ever tried to build a democracy as big and as diverse as ours before, one where our allegiances and our community are defined not by race or blood, but by common creed." That is what he believes, that building a multiracial democracy is difficult, and that's why no other country's actually achieved it. He also said that while he understands the difficulty, the vast majority of us do not want to live in a country that is bitter and divided. We want something better. So I think Barack Obama sits in this unique place where he can speak to that voter that might be recalcitrant or resistant to the idea of multiracial democracy, because they accepted it for 8 years at some level. And then really quickly to go to Michelle. Michelle Obama was a tour de force tonight. We were talking about this before, Alex and I, that one of the things people often forget is that as talented and brilliant as Barack Obama is as an orator, Michelle Obama is his equal, and every so often, sometimes even better. Michelle Obama preached tonight. She gave a sermon to this country. She gave instructions and things that needed to be done, and this audience ate it all the way up. And the last thing I will say, we also heard love stories tonight. It is so rare to hear the kind of deep and abiding love that we heard from Doug Emhoff. Dougie loves Kamala, and we got that full on. And we can also see that Barack loves Michelle, and they both loved her mom. That love and that joy, this room lit up with it, and it is the reason that they're doing so well on this Democratic side, because they're bringing the love and the joy and the family connection that we lacked at that other convention.
Yeah, it is it's very good. You know, it's a really good point, and it feels like not a bookend, but a companion to the "We love you, Joe. We love Joe. We love Joe." The outpouring of love last night for President Biden on night one, and then to have those love stories talked about on night two. It does feel like companion pieces. Now, speaking of love, I was sitting next to Simone Sanders, former senior staffer to Kamala Harris, who was watching the Doug Emhoff speech, and I thought you, Simone Sanders Townsend, were going to crawl out of your skin. I thought you were going to leave your body. You were so enthused by that speech.
I just, because this is not what Doug Emhoff signed up to do when he went to law school, right? He did not have this on his bingo card. And I remember right after the inauguration in 2020, and the second gentleman then and the vice president, they were going to have to walk up these stairs and do something. And as they were about to walk up, the second gentleman was about to walk right with the vice president. I'm like, no, sir, you don't. I have to. It's like, somebody tell the staff that no one briefed the second gentleman. He's like, to see him standing on that stage tonight, he was fully in his moment. He was standing there, and oftentimes you talk about spouses supporting their, partner who's in a powerful position. And I frankly sometimes think we talk about it in a place of, that it comes from a place of weakness. And Doug Emhoff is a strong person. He is a strong man who is self-assured, someone who the vice president leans on for advice. He is somebody, if you really want to understand what is going on or how to maybe get your point across better, ask the second gentleman, because he is the best possible counsel. And so to see him standing up there tonight as an example for so many people across the country, because Doug Emhoff's family looks like a lot of families. I am in a blended family. Like I have a son, I am a stepmother, but I have a son, so I just thought it was amazing for America to see that. Michelle LaVaughn Robinson Obama from the south side of Chicago, honey, was on that stage tonight. And yes, she preached, but frankly, I think that she was fed up. She was fed up with Trump. That's why in 2016 she went low. 2020 when they go low, 2016 when they go low, we go high. She looked him dead in the face and gave America instructions. It was what people needed to hear.
Barack Obama, I just thought it was so striking to think about how he started in a convention hall, as we all know, and he gave a speech about red and blue, and it was so striking to have him update it to the algorithms, to the MAGA divisions, to those attacks. He really spoke a bit about you build a wall, then you feel lonely.
Yeah.
And then he applied that to Kamala Harris and basically said, in so many words, that she is the rightful successor to the Obama-Biden era. And that was so powerful, and I think will be heard well outside of the hall.
And through the kind of politics that Kamala Harris is promising, we can come together as a country. We can do something together. We can reinstate those bonds.
My favorite moment was when Michelle Obama talked about mistakes.
Yeah.
Because when you talk about this sort of subtlety, it's like it's like a weird elephant in the room. Like she said they're going to make mistakes. It's like no one says something like that in the convention. Everything's sort of like, we're going to kill it and it's great. And it's like, yeah, they're people.
They are still only human. They're not perfect. Like all of us, they will make mistakes. Luckily, though, this is not just on them.
And that to me was like a very profound point, and also a profound point about democracy, which is it's just people all the way down. And on the other side, the weird AI-generated images of this bizarre kind of God King figure in Donald Trump. And, like, it's just people. And the people up on the stage and the people in the hall and the people out in the country. It's just people all the way down in all of their, like, flaws and all of their hope and all their aspirations. And I thought she just captured that incredibly beautifully.
But the people who didn't speak at the RNC, a former VP, a former First Lady, a former Second Lady, any former president or a former chief of staff. So when you talk about the human connection, we saw that connection in the last 2 nights. And my biggest takeaway has nothing to do with politics. Doug Emhoff up there as the second gentleman. We keep saying, oh, we judge men in that position. We as a society, as a culture, haven't decided what to do with the male spouses of powerful women. He was extraordinary, and it just was this unbelievable reminder to our daughters and sons, we might have a black female president. And it doesn't matter what your politics are, in the scope of you got to see it to be it. That's just extraordinary for this country.
I also got to say, it's a huge thing for wife guys everywhere. To see Doug Emhoff. I say that like sort of tongue-in-cheek, but like it really is true. It is a beautiful thing. He loves his wife, and he loves talking about her, and he thinks the world of her, and it's just a great thing to see.
We've also just had like 2 phenomenal First Lady speeches.
Yeah.
I mean, talking about last night Hillary Clinton was very good and was a presidential candidate in her own right and everything. I really think this Michelle Obama speech was something special, but in part just because of how well it was done, but also some of the stuff that you're talking about, Chris, in terms of the human level. Unfortunately, we know what comes next. We know folks are going to do everything they can to distort her, meaning Kamala Harris's truth. My husband and I sadly know a little something about this. For years, Donald Trump did everything in his power to try to make people fear us. His limited and narrow view of the world made him feel threatened by the existence of 2 hardworking, highly educated, successful people who also happen to be black. Who's going to tell him that the job he's currently seeking might just be one of those black jobs? That, in that moment, when you left your body, because I was sitting here next to you, it was an incredibly well-delivered political punch, and also coming from a place of pain.
Really
Which is inviting our empathy and showing her vulnerability in a way that makes you see one another as human beings. They are both showing it and saying it. It's very powerful stuff.
Extremely powerful.
Now, and we're joined by John Giles, Republican mayor of Mesa, Arizona, who endorsed Kamala Harris and is speaking tonight. Good evening and welcome.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
There are these different themes, and viewers and citizens know. Some of them feel like, okay, sure, left-handed carpenters for Kerry. Sure, why not? Yes, everyone's welcome. And then there are themes that actually do seem to resonate. Tonight is Republicans for Harris. You are one of them, and you're an elected Republican, and not in a super blue state, I might add. Explain to us what tonight is about and what you're involved with, what you're trying to tell people.
Well, I'm here to talk to people like myself who are in the political middle that feel maybe like we're politically homeless. We've been, in Arizona, we've been specifically invited to leave the party if we're not part of the MAGA. And so there's a lot of us that are disenfranchised. There's a lot of us that, from tradition and maybe from a policy point of view, don't necessarily feel entirely comfortable in the Democratic Party. But at the same time, we've seen Donald Trump. We're well aware of his faults, and many of us have concluded that he is ineligible to be the President of the United States. So my message is just to people like me in the political middle that this is not a year that we can follow misplaced loyalty and vote for a Republican at the top of the ticket. The best candidate in this race is Vice President Kamala Harris.
Yeah, and President Biden hit that note last night. As you know, there are places, including Arizona, where in his last election, he was effective at making an argument, at being inclusive, at rejecting efforts to paint the Democratic Party as somehow left or out of step with Arizona. The speech went in late into the evening last night, and a lot of people watched it. But for those who might not remember every moment, here was that moment about Harris.
Selecting Kamala was the very first decision I made when I became our nominee. And it was the best decision I made my whole career. She'll be a president we can all be proud of. And she will be an historic president who puts her stamp on America's future.
That was his embrace. What do you say to people who are center or conservative and wary that they might have been warmer to Biden, but they're not sure about Harris, who is a newer national figure to many people? What do you say to them?
Yeah, I get that, and there's a lot of people in that category. I mean, she does she came to the office of vice president with a reputation of being a fairly progressive senator. And I think that was probably fair. But I've seen her evolve over the last 4 years. She's had this amazing on-the-job experience with Joe Biden, and I think the best predictor of future performance is past performance. And we've seen the Biden-Harris administration be a very centrist administration. They've accomplished some amazing bipartisan legislation through Congress, things like the CHIPS Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, the Inflation Reduction Act. These have resulted in billions of dollars of private investment in my community. I'm going to ribbon cuttings and groundbreakings every week because of all the investment that's coming to my city. That didn't happen under the Trump administration. So I think she is going to govern from a centrist position. Governor Walz obviously has that reputation as well. So there's a lot of comfort to be found in her past record.
Yeah, really interesting. Joy Reid and I watched the RNC, which had its type of outreach, Joy. But this isn't exactly Hulk Hogan. This is more like small-town Republicans. Your thoughts, Joy?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, it is remarkable, Ari and Mayor Giles, to see so many Republicans being willing to come forward and not just say we reject Donald Trump, but to say we actually affirmatively support Vice President Harris, which is a different thing.
It is.
And yet, it's still a relatively small number. You know, I know enough Republicans, Michael Steele is a dear friend, and others who I know their values don't align with Donald Trump. They couldn't look at themselves in the mirror. Yeah. And yet, you know, yourself, Georgia Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan, who is also supporting. Why do you think that your numbers are relatively small? Because in addition to being an adjudicated sexual assaulter, a known liar, 34-count felon, and all the things we know about Donald Trump, he also loses a lot of elections.
Sure.
He loses Republicans' elections. Yeah. You think about the Kerry Lakes of the world, in places like Arizona. Right. It's not like he's a winner.
No.
What do you think keeps so many of your Republican colleagues from not joining you?
Well, it is a bit of a mystery. I mean, you've seen all the Senate Republicans that when they were initially giving their thoughts about Donald Trump couldn't have been more condemning as far as his character and their predictions for a total failure and the loss of the soul of the Republican Party if he were elected. We've seen all those things come to pass. But again, they step up and defend him. So you can only conclude that, you know, the political price to be paid for crossing Donald Trump is the end of your career.
Yeah.
So I've gotten an amazing outreach of people who are not elected officials in the Republican Party who stop me in the grocery store and say, thank you so much for giving voice to to where I'm at. Like I said, there's this huge politically homeless population in the United States outside of elected officials.
Yeah.
And so I think we need to help them get more comfortable with Vice President Harris and understand that she is someone who's going to lead the debate.
I think one of the profound things about what you're doing is that you're not saying I'm leaving the Republican Party and I'm for Harris. You're a Republican for Harris. You're still fundamentally a Republican and what that used to mean. To you, if Donald Trump is defeated and there's a chance to rebuild the Republican Party, for you, what will that Republican Party be about, or what should it be about? What should its values be?
Well, we've always had an extreme right part of the Republican Party, kind of this John Birch, libertarian.
And Reagan and those guys ran out of the party.
Absolutely. And you know what? That's okay.
Yeah.
I mean, the point, and I think the lesson to be learned from the Democratic Party, the success that you feel here, is a big tent is a good tent. We've got people like Kari Lake that are trying to turn it into a one sleeping bag tent, and that's just that's going to predict the demise of the Republican Party. So hopefully we will bottom out. Hopefully the MAGA Party will fail miserably, and not just at the top of the ticket, but up and down the ticket. And people like me will be welcomed back to the Republican Party, and a diversity of opinion will be tolerated and embraced in the Republican Party.
I want to bring in Stephanie Grisham, who we all just saw and heard on stage, former aide in the Trump White House, working with the First Lady, the then First Lady Melania Trump. I wrote down what you said, Stephanie, and I want to read it back to you because I tried to get my phone fast enough to record it because this is some truth-telling. You said, behind the scenes, Donald Trump mocks his supporters. He calls them basement dwellers. Wow.
Yeah.
Say more.
Yeah. I mean, it's just true. And I felt like, I spent 6 years with him, and I really did believe in him at the beginning. And I really wanted people to know what he's like behind the cameras, because all he cares about is when he's in front of the cameras. And so if I can reach any independents out there or Republicans out there to understand that I get it. I get what it was like to believe in him. I get it. But I just want people to know that this is who he really is behind the scenes.
And what was compelling? I mean, I've talked to people, Republicans, who, like you, believed in Donald Trump. And one person was just honest with me and said they liked the fact that he was a celebrity. And they felt the Democrats always had the celebrities, and they liked that he was famous. And what was it that made him compelling to you initially?
So I joined the campaign 2 weeks after he came down that escalator, and it was because I just worked at one of his rallies as a favor to somebody, and the way the crowd reacted to him, and the way that he spoke so plainly, he didn't use just the political jargon that everybody used.
He was like a politician.
Yeah, he was like a breath of fresh air, which really makes me sad to say that right now. But at the time, and then I just kept going, and I kept seeing the people's reaction to him, and I thought, well, maybe if we can smooth out his kinks. Yeah.
There were a lot of kinks. I mean, and you talked about your disillusionment. Obviously, January 6th was a big part of that.
Yes.
But for you, and because there's so many Republicans that are here. I mean, I just spoke with the mayor of Mesa, Arizona. He's a whole Republican.
It's my home state.
Yeah. And people are being welcomed so warmly here. There's not any judgment here. This is like, come to the cookout, right? Come to the party. How does that feel for you?
I don't understand it, because for me the last 4 years since I've been out of office it's just been hate and hate and hate coming at me, but also just watching him as a citizen. And it's just, nothing's good without me. The country's terrible. Everything's bad, but only I can fix it. And so this is it's joyful. Of course, that's the word everyone's using, but it's really unifying. And I believe that the Democrats here are understanding that we've got to come together, and we're not going to agree on policies, period, probably.
Yeah.
But we've got to talk to each other like humans again.
Yeah. And Claire, look, I met a guy last night when we got back to the hotel who talked about the idea of this as a family reunion. And then we just heard Jamie Harrison use that same language. Because a family is full of people who think all sorts of different things, may feel different ways, but they all get along and love each other. The family reunion theme definitely feels like the vibe right now.
Yeah, because we all have somebody in our family that sometimes we want to strangle them, right? Because we disagree with them.
But we're not going to actually do it.
Right. But on the other hand, at least I'm so glad you feel what I think is sincere in the Democratic Party, and that is we can go from Bernie and AOC to Joe Manchin. We really can. And even though there are times we get really frustrated with Joe Manchin, but we can. And the idea that we are trying to reach out, I do not for the life of me understand why Donald Trump has never seen the need to reach out to people. I mean, he never really asked the Haley voters to support him. He never really asked the DeSantis voters to support him, and that's in his own party, much less asking Democrats who, to come to his side. What is that about his psyche that he is unwilling to ask people to join his movement?
Because he doesn't think he needs anybody. He wants to be an elected king. He wants to be, an autocratic government where everything he says goes and everyone falls in line, whether it's in Congress, in the DOJ, as we know, the military. He doesn't want to have people join him. He wants people to just do what he says.
Yeah.
And again, that was something I watched him evolve into, I have to say. I don't know in the beginning he even had that way of thinking, but I watched him evolve as he learned about the power he had. And I watched it just happen over time. And at the end, he became just a tyrant. And truly, it was just, don't question me. We're just going to do what I want to do. And,
Can you talk about the outreach that the Harris Walz team made to you? And kind of what was that process like? What brought you in the door?
Well, I had been talking to some people prior to Biden stepping down about the possibility of endorsing him. I knew that as somebody who had been around Trump for so long again, that I probably had a good voice and could speak out. And I wanted it to be impactful, though. So finally, when the Republicans for Harris came to me and they asked me if I would be involved, I jumped at the chance. And everybody I've worked with on the campaign has been fantastic and welcoming. And it's just such a breath of fresh air having worked in a campaign and in an administration that I worked in before. And it's truly been wonderful.
And for people who feel uncomfortable as you did with Donald Trump and the way that he behaves, and by the way, we've talked about this, we can tell that he has contempt for his supporters. Like, I think anyone watching can tell that he does not have a great deal of respect for his followers.
No.
But when somebody comes to that realization, what does that conversation look like? To say it's okay to, you don't have to vote for him. You could vote the other way.
It's hard. It's hard to admit you were wrong. It's hard to admit you were so wrong. And so I try to say that to people, like, look, I get it. I understand, but I'm telling you what he's like. And look, go behind that voting booth. It's a private place. And vote your conscience. Right. And I really believe a lot of people, especially Republican women, are going to vote for Kamala, but maybe not tell their husbands.
You know what?
I really believe that.
And I think your courage, and make no mistake about this, everybody needs to understand that what you're doing is courageous.
Yeah.
You will get loads of hate from lots of places, then it will be very, very hard. So kudos to you and your bravery. But your bravery allows people that maybe aren't so brave to quietly, like you said, go in the voting booth and say, well, if Stephanie Grisham, who is that close to him,
it's private back there.
I could do this in my own private little voting booth.
I really believe that's going to happen. I think she's got the silent vote this time. I really believe she'll have it.
And do you think that, because to me, I feel like Dobbs changed so much. That it fundamentally changed the equation. For people who might have thought they had the luxury to stick with Trump before, especially women, and any man who cares about women.
Yep.
Do you feel that it was profound in that way, that Dobbs changed things?
Absolutely. And I tell you what, I live in Kansas now, in a very small town in Kansas, and Kansas overturned, they voted to have women's choice be put back into the state constitution. And to see that in such a conservative state was really interesting. And I think that was a big deal. I think absolutely you're right. Like, I think women across the country realize their very freedoms were going to be taken away. And I think the Harris campaign has been brilliant at bringing in people who talk about, it's not like we're using abortion as birth control necessarily. I think that yesterday the speaker was absolutely important, and I think that it just shows how short-sighted and short-minded and misogynistic, frankly, Trump and Vance both are.